Howdy again everyone. A little while ago I made a review of Canon's original full-frame 5D camera from 2005 and people seemed to really enjoy it, but I was caught off guard when loads of people in the comments section asked me to go on to review Canon's original 6D camera. Released in 2012 at a price of $2,000 or £1,800 here in the UK, it unsurprisingly offers you much more capability than a much older 5D camera, but over on eBay nowadays it can be found for as little as $350 or under £300 here in the UK. Is that really a bargain price? Well, maybe, if you're desperate for a full-frame camera and have some old Canon EF mount lenses lying around the place. I can't believe this thing is 13 years old already. A small portion of my viewers weren't even born back then. It was Canon's lowest priced full-frame camera ever at the time, and it was also designed to be considerably smaller and lighter than its competitors. It was met with perhaps a little skepticism upon release for its rather basic features and simple autofocus system, but the 6D quickly became a bit of a cult classic, as, with a little work, it's actually pretty capable for all kinds of applications and was many photographers' first full-frame camera, including my own. This very camera was gifted to my wife by a generous family member so she and I could get more serious with our photography. In fact, it wouldn't be a total exaggeration to say that having access to my wife's 6D was what enabled me to start doing the full-frame lens testing that enabled this YouTube channel to start taking off and really growing, which ended up paying for her engagement ring and, well, the rest is history. For years I used this camera for testing lenses and we even took it on holidays and on our honeymoon with us, so I probably have about 100 gigabytes of images and footage taken with this thing to draw from in this video, and more importantly, I have gotten to know this camera over that time very, very well. What features do you get with this full-frame camera from 2012 that you wouldn't with, say, that original 5D from 2005? Well, at 20 megapixels, the sensor is far higher resolution and just about good enough for most photography uses nowadays, unless you're wanting super detailed landscape pictures. It's also got reasonably good image quality when shooting at high ISO levels, although obviously not as good as today's standards. You're getting 1080p video recording at up to 30 frames per second, and you can also shoot at 60 frames per second if you drop down to 720p. That was still a little bit of a novelty on a full-frame camera back in 2012. You get in-camera corrections for vignetting and chromatic aberration, albeit only when using official Canon lenses, and you have to upload the correct lens profile to your camera for them. It has some quiet shutter modes which were, well, a little bit quieter for shooting than a normal SLR camera of the time. Its autofocus system was dead basic. It didn't even have on-sensor phase detection, so if you're shooting in live view mode or shooting video, autofocusing was by contrast detection only and is unbelievably slow, nothing like what we get to enjoy today. However, when shooting through the viewfinder, its autofocus is quick enough, and the central of its 11 autofocus points was very sensitive, shooting at -3 EV, which is helpful when shooting in the dark. In fact, this was a great camera at the time for astrophotography. A reminder though, phase detection autofocus through the viewfinder tends to be slightly inaccurate on SLR cameras, depending on the lens you're using, and it can be especially weak with some third-party lenses. And of course, 11 autofocus points is pretty stingy, and they're all pretty centralized. The camera does allow autofocus micro adjustments in the menus, but that won't eliminate inconsistency. For best accuracy, use the contrast detection mode in live view, even if it is hideously slow. It also does not have face or subject detection and tracking autofocus modes or anything like that. The 6D had some nice extra features for its time as well, too, like a built-in electronic level, single axis only, built-in Wi-Fi and GPS, interchangeable screens for the viewfinder, although the viewfinder only offers 97% coverage. It also has HDR and multiple exposure shooting modes, which were still quite novel at the time. Basically, if you're willing to shoot through the viewfinder for the quickest autofocus experience, then this is a camera with some good basic capabilities, and it can certainly produce gorgeous pictures without too much trouble. The camera's build quality is nice, it feels pretty tough. As you can see, the camera is indeed smaller than usual for a full-frame digital SLR, and I can tell you it's not too heavy at 770 grams. It handles well enough with a couple of customizable shooting modes, top and rear dials with an 8-way controller, the switch at the rear for changing between still and video shooting, and switching into live view mode is really satisfying to play around with, and the top LCD screen is useful too, lighting up at the press of a button, and there are some really useful additional control buttons on top too. On the side we get a microphone input but no headphone jack. We also get USB and HDMI outputs, although for some reason I couldn't get the HDMI to work for this review, despite the camera's firmware being fully updated. On the other side we have just a single SD card slot, as you can see. And beneath that, we have a space for Canon's classic LPE6 battery, or for its later compatible variants like this one. As usual for a Canon digital SLR, that battery will last for ages, at least around 1000 shots if you're shooting through the viewfinder. Shooting live view or video, or having Wi-Fi turned on, though, will greatly reduce battery life, as you'd expect. The camera screen was a bit of a letdown for many people on its release. It has no touchscreen capability, and more seriously, it is fixed in place. But still, it's bright and high resolution and gets the job done nicely, far better than that old original 5D camera anyway. The camera's maximum burst rate is a rather pedestrian 4.5 frames per second. When shooting in JPEG mode, the camera will go on shooting like this pretty much forever. When shooting RAW or RAW plus JPEG though, the buffer will run out after only about 2 seconds, which is pretty weak, and it'll go down to shooting from there at about 1 frame per second. Here's the camera's quote-unquote silent shooting mode. It is noticeably quieter, but the mirror noise is obviously still there, and the continuous shooting speed is down to only 3 frames per second now. And here's the quietest shooting mode of all, live view shooting with silent mode 2 turned on. This would be just about quiet enough for me not to worry too much about shooting a wedding with this camera, for example, but as I've mentioned, actually focusing your lens in live view mode is a slow process with the 6D. The camera has other basic features like mirror lockup mode, highlight tone priority, sensor cleaning, auto rotation, and you can make basic adjustments to the autofocus system as well. But honestly, when it comes to features, that's just about it, and it certainly predates any kind of image stabilization. It's a very simple camera, and Canon wanted it that way, otherwise it might have competed too heavily with their own 5D Mark III camera, which was also out at the time. So, let's see about image quality. I wonder what that old 20 megapixel sensor can really do. On the left, we get a shot in RAW mode. In the middle, we have a JPEG with the sharpening set just to 1. And on the right, we have a JPEG with the default sharpening setting of 3. The raw image looks absolutely wonderful here for a 20 megapixel camera. It's packed with detail and there's very little sign of moire. And of course we get those pleasant Canon colours. I processed this image with Canon's own raw editing software, Digital Photo Professional 4. Both of the JPEG images are showing what is, in my opinion, Canon's rather bad JPEG sharpening of the time. They show blooming around hard edges, which ironically leaves you with pictures that look soft in their fine details. It's only really in recent years that Canon have improved upon this JPEG performance, to be honest. If you must shoot JPEGs, then your best bet may be to shoot at sharpness level 0, and then add your own sharpening with computer software. That tended to work well for me. Okay, let's move on and look at high ISO image quality. This is probably the 6D's strongest hand. Up to ISO 800, image noise is not noticeable, and ISO 1600 still looks perfectly fine. It's at ISO 3200 that the image finally starts getting noticeably noisy, although there's still some detail to be seen here. Finally, ISO 6400 and especially 12800 are looking really too mushy for critical use. Still, for 2012, this was a really good performance, and I'd say it's only really about as top worse than some new cameras you see today. Let's have a quick look at dynamic range. Even when shooting in RAW at ISO 100, if you pull up your shadows, you certainly get a lot of degradation here, and even for its time, this was a somewhat weak performance. This is another area where even modern aps-c cameras can do better nowadays. Next, video quality. The camera can shoot 1080p footage at up to 30 frames per second. To start with, here's some old footage of mine straight out of the camera. As you can see, it's definitely not a very sharp 1080p, and there's a whole ton of moire to be seen in the fine details here. This is not very pleasant footage to look at, certainly not by today's standards. But the camera again shows strength in its high ISO noise performance. Here you can see that at 1080p, the camera's best image quality is at ISO 100, but ISO levels up to 1600 still look really good. It's at ISO 3200 that real noise is creeping in here, and 6400 or beyond are not really usable. And for anyone interested, here is the video quality at 720p and 60 frames per second. It's obviously a lot softer and surprisingly much more noisy, as you should be able to see here even at ISO 100, and ISO 400 onwards is looking pretty bad. ISO 3200 and beyond look particularly dreadful. So if you want to shoot at 720p at 60 frames per second, you'd better keep your ISO levels as low as possible and make sure it's exposed correctly too, so you don't have to boost that noisy footage in post. Here's the rolling shutter you can expect to see on this camera. At 1080p, as you might have expected, the jelly effect is pretty bad, and at 720p, it's reduced but definitely still there. And that is the Canon EOS 6D. By today's standards, it's definitely a very slow and clunky camera to use with problematic autofocus control, and I certainly don't like the quality of its video footage much, but for a camera of its time, the image quality was surprisingly good in many ways, and its pictures can still stand up today, especially its low light images. Even if its JPEG images are rather soft out of the camera, its RAW images look wonderfully detailed, and its high ISO noise performance is impressive too. In fact, that really was the camera's biggest strength at the time, which was delightful to me as I enjoy shooting in darker conditions. If you're on the market for a low-priced, full-frame digital SLR, then this is still a decent option if you're okay to work a little slowly and can find one at a nice low price.